Christopher Cantwell and Angel Unzueta pit Iron Man against the elements as Tony finds himself deathly injured and stranded in the Utah desert after a mission gone wrong. Christopher Cantwell strips Iron Man back to his basics, quite literally this issue, as he begins his final story arc for the series. I love the simplicity of the premise of this issue, just Iron Man trapped in the wilderness with a broken armor and he's got to fight a villain who is essentially just evil Bear Grylls. And it led to a kind of cool technology versus nature sort of setting where Tony had to rely on his wits and himself rather than his fancy technology, which still ended up saving the day thanks to it just being there. And it was a great way to explore Tony's new lease on life post-rehab and employs some of the lessons he has learnt during his time there, specifically about stepping off the shoulders of those strongest around you. And of course, that turns out to be the Iron Man armor, which was very humorous and a surprisingly deep thing to include in the issue. The book also links to the overarching story of Source Control, a new black marketplace that sells doomsday type weaponry, and Tony wants to take them down, but not as Iron Man, but as just Tony Stark, using all of his money to buy up all of the weapons, which is a really fun premise, and I'm looking forward to seeing a more spy thriller side of Tony Stark. Angel Unzueta continues his amazingly detailed artwork for the series, this time utilizing a slightly dreary color palette for the desolate Utah wilderness, while giving us some really fun action sequences that you don't really often see Iron Man partaking in, like log traps and pitfalls. Iron Man issue 21 was a very fun man vs nature storyline that kicked off the final story arc for the series, showcasing some of the lessons Tony has learnt during his stint in rehab while teasing a very spy thriller-esque story to come. I'm going to give this issue a 10 out of 10. Iron Man issue 21 finds Tony flying on a commercial airliner, knowing that this is all part of his rehab and the noise and busyness helps keep him distracted. The stewardess asks if he would like a drink, but Tony wants to stick with tomato juice as the woman next to him orders wine to celebrate that she is sitting next to Iron Man. Tony tries to call up Vic, who isn't answering his calls, but Tony hopes that he'll help him out as the woman next to him talks about how she's happy he didn't kill that gorilla with his laser hands. Tony is glad as well, since it was all just a mix-up, but the woman knows that mistakes happen to the best of them, knowing that she used to teach at State University back in the day, and there were these two genius kids who would come up with all sorts of ideas, and then one day the Slavic kid ended up blowing up one of his inventions in his face. She thinks his name was Vincent or Victor or something, wondering whatever happened to him after he left school. Tony, knowing she's talking about Dr. Doom, stays quiet, merely stating that he's sure the man turned out as something in some capacity. The plane is suddenly attacked by a masked man, who steals a case from one of the passengers. Tony springs into action, getting Boss to magnetically assemble the suit onto him, protecting Tony from the bullets the man fires at him. As Tony crushes the man's gun, he unleashes a sonic wave from his belt, blasting Tony back as the plane goes out of control. The man says that this is on Iron Man's head as Tony's suit reboots, telling the people to get their oxygen masks on as he tells the pilots if they have this under control. The pilots regain altitude control as the man whose case was stolen demands Tony get it back since it was top secret weapon plans. Tony asks the pilot if they can land, and the pilot knows that he can as Iron Man speeds out of the plane, asking himself why did it have to always be weapons plans and not baseball cards. He finds that they are over Utah as he catches up with the masked man, who fires a group of missiles at him, one of which pierces Tony's leg, injuring him and destroying his boot thruster. Tony plummets to the ground, landing in a pond as his suit tells him that the water is safe to drink. Tony looks over his wound, pulling an adamantium spike from his leg as Boss tells him that he won't be able to walk properly until it's treated. Asks Boss where they are, but the suit's GPS systems are offline, with only the simple compass system operational. Tony rips up his pant leg and uses it to bind his wound in the armor, allowing him to properly move his leg again. He goes through the rest of the suit, finding that if he tries to fly, the hydrogen cells in the suit will explode, meaning that he'll just have to walk, telling the suit to try and see if he can locate the thief he was pursuing. The suit tracks the man, spotting him on a nearby ridge, but the villain also spots Tony. Tony gets walking, complaining about the 96-degree heat as the man reveals himself, welcoming Tony to his world as he cuts a rope, hitting Tony with a log trap. The man grabs Iron Man, knowing that he's a bit more of an indoor kid as he reveals that he was part of the Weapon X program and they call him Switchback. Tony thinks that explains the adamantium fetish the man seems to have gotten as he blasts the man back with his repulsors. Tony thinks that he's gotten better of the man, walking towards him, but he falls into a deadfall, where he is left by Switchback as nightfall comes. Tony knows that he could try try and fly out, but the suit might blow up, and Switchback isn't registering on his compass, so he probably is trying to starve Tony out. Tony begins thinking about how morphine could help with his leg, quickly disregarding the need for the drug as rain begins to batter him. He reminds himself of some stuff he learned in rehab, reciting some things he learned there to himself as he takes off his helmet to drink some of the rainwater. Switchback meanwhile knows the rain won't let up for hours, deciding to go and see Tony before he drowns. Switchback tells Tony to lose the armor and he'll help pull him out of the hole and take him to a highway. Tony doesn't answer him as he isn't in the armor, sneaking up behind Switchback and kicking him into the deadfall, where the armor comes back to life and grabs the man, holding him down. Tony tells him that in recovery, they are told to step off the shoulders of those who are strong enough to support them, and as it turns out, his Iron Man suit shoulders are pretty strong. He says that he found the man's cave and plans for the new mad bomb he stole, thinking that the man seems a little too woodsy to build a bomb. Switchback says that he only sells weapons, not build them, and uses his money to prepare for the end of what's coming for all of them, telling Tony that weapons are the only shared currency that Source Control care for. Tony calls back the armor, leaving Switchback in the hole, assuring him that since this is his world, he'll be fine in it. Days later, Tony meets with Rhodey, telling him that he's buying a mad bomb as he explains that there is a thriving international black market for high-powered weapons and tech, and it's all run by a network called the Source Control. James has heard of it, and Tony is glad since he's going to use every dollar he still has to try and buy up everything they have for sale. James thinks that he wants to get kicked out of the Avengers again, but Tony says that he needs to shut them down in a bloodless way, and if he goes in red and gold, there will be casualties, so they need to do this covertly. James knows that this will cost Tony, but Tony doesn't care since it will be worth it, having called James in because he trusts him the most, and he wants the man's help if he's willing to give it. Rhodey agrees to help, liking the idea of doing it quietly for a change. Tony thinks that they will need a third man to front the operation, thinking about their friend Vic Martinelli, who James knows called him as well, and he is the reason why James knows of Source Control in the first place. But that's not all, as James reveals that Vic is actually dead.